Welcome back, everyone. Delighted to be back and go into a little bit more detail post Black Friday, Cyber Monday. It's been a busy couple of days, so our hope is to give a little bit of context on what's gone on for StoreHero customers, but also in a very exciting, new edition, we're going to be going into more detail and doing a deep dive on two particular anonymized StoreHero stores. So some of our customers have been generous enough to allow us to actually dive into the dashboards and give some context on how different brands of different sizes actually might have experienced the last couple of days. So, Thomas, from your side, how have you found the last couple of days? How have you found, retailers have found it as well?
Yeah, I mean, crazy, really. I mean, literally, just before we probably dive into some of the other stores, it might be worth even just chatting through the Shopify numbers there. I think they've just come out in the last 20 minutes there before we came on. But yeah, I thought it would be up this year, but not to the level it is. I mean, some interesting numbers here. So, sales for BFCM weekend 9.3 billion, up 24% on the previous year. Average order value $108.12, up I think 10-15% as well. I thought sales would be up, but I did not think 24% up in a year. I mean, it's been a really, really difficult year for a lot of brands. I did not expect to see such an increase in sales for BFCM weekend. Did you?
No, definitely not. And it was actually a really interesting competition we ran on your LinkedIn
Yeah.
where we got asked people to guess, what that overarching number might be and what the average order value might be. I think most people were relatively conservative, looking at kind of small single percentage growth. A couple of mad people put 10% or 10 billion, but to be honest, they were probably closer than most others. So very interesting. I think it challenges a lot of the narrative around, okay, are we in this recessionary period? What does spending power actually look like? I think different segments of the economy are responding in different ways. And whatever the situation is, I don't think anyone can say they have a complete finger on the pulse as to exactly what that dynamic looks like. So really interesting overall. You made a good point as well that ultimately this data is going to be somewhat skewed by the nature of the fact that Shopify is such a juggernaut. It continues to grow and outpace its competitors. So that's ultimately something we have to factor in there as well.
Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting competition we ran. Working there for 3.5 years, that was a competition ran every weekend, every week, every year, sorry, internally in one of the Slack. So everyone would be in trying to guess the exact sales figure and the number of orders that would go through the system over the weekend. I was never anywhere near getting the accurate answer, but it's always interesting to kind of take part in it. But yes, but one interesting thing to highlight there that you kind of touched on, yes, sales are up for Shopify 24% year on year. That does not mean everybody on Shopify's sales are up 24%. It's almost a vanity metric to some respect. It's just worth kind of digging into a little bit, and that it's Shopify. The revenue gone through Shopify year over year is up 24%. It doesn't take into account all of the new stores that have joined Shopify in the last year. And obviously, a lot of new stores have joined Shopify in the last year, but a lot of them are definitely more enterprise focused. That there is a lot of newer stores on the platform this year that are generating a lot more volume than in previous years as well. So while it is definitely worth noting, it's not telling the full picture either.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Like even looking at, obviously Shopify have made a big push for enterprise. Ultimately, that's going to capture the headlines when a big store, a big pillar store really makes the switch and re-platforms. But at the end of the day, the majority of Shopify's business is made up of SMEs who are ultimately maybe making the shift to e-commerce for the first time. And I think Shopify have made it easy for anyone else really to say, be the only show in town to a large extent. And we ultimately do support WooCommerce, Magento, and BigCommerce, a couple of other platforms. In some situations, that will be potentially a better solution if there's a particularly customized route, or maybe there's a B2B component, or whatever the case may be. But all in all, I think Shopify is definitely hitting it out of the park and definitely makes it easier for stores to focus on all the fun stuff that might, be challenging, but certainly not some back-end server stuff that people may have had to do in years gone by.
Yeah, as far as I can see from these numbers, Shopify is just steamrolling everybody else at a faster clip than I think most of us expected. Like 17,500 people made their very first sale over the weekend on Shopify. 55,000 merchants had their highest ever day of sales. I think we've been speaking to a couple of those over the weekend. And interestingly as well, 74% of all the shopping over the weekend was also done on mobile. So again, I mean, just some really, really interesting pieces there. The sheer volume, like 17,500 people making their very, very first e-commerce sale in one weekend it's hard to put that many people into a picture, really, isn't it?
Incredible. Yeah. And even looking at Harley, with the president of Shopify, published an interesting tweet there where he looked at the actual sales, how this actually compares to previous years. So between 2019 and 2023, Shopify's own GMV for Black Friday has gone from 2.9 billion to 5.1. That was really that COVID year, but still up to 6.3, 7.5, and then 9.3. So incredible growth there. And I suppose in line with that, we did see some interesting stats published from Salesforce around, okay, what the discount rates look like. So again, it's a big component of and a focus we would have working with merchants. Okay, ultimately, how do they approach a discounting strategy with kind of profit in mind? That was up 28% globally and 30% in the US. What would you read into that from your side, Thomas? Like, what would that mean as part of the kind of broader approach that brands are taking to discounting?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, and it's something we'll probably touch into in two of the brands we're going to look into. But I mean, yeah, discounting, obviously, with the nature of the time of the year, it's quite prevalent everywhere you log on. There's huge discounts on everywhere. But what I would say to brands is that you need to be very, very diligent and careful around the discounts that you are running. Obviously, your target ROAS, your target CPA, your target margin per order will need to be readjusted to allow for the discount that you are running. So, if you are running discounts and you are hoping to run steeper discounts than usual, just make sure that you've ran your numbers correctly on it. It's one thing hitting those kind of revenue orientated metrics. If you're trying to hit a certain revenue metric, yes, you can probably discount your way and drive enough demand to meet that revenue metric, but you might actually do it at the cost of any margin that you could make. And obviously, we're all in e-commerce to try and make margin at the end of the day. So you just want to make sure that you're not completely taking the win from your sales, really.
Definitely, it sets if it's a case where your gross profit on a per order basis is contracted because of that discounting, it sets a much higher bar in terms of volume of sales you need to reach, and potentially that's the game you're playing. And again, that's fine, but just be aware of what that trade-off is, and also it's not outside the realm of possibility that people don't understand or don't have clear visibility on those underlying cost of goods, and end up in a situation where you push that too far and you're actually unprofitable on a per order basis, where it's on the first order, or maybe it's a number of orders in that realistically you can't run a business waiting for that fourth, fifth, sixth order, depending on the nature of your business as well. So really interesting point I'm sure we'll touch on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is a really interesting one for sure. So we'll dig into it. One of the brands we're going to look at today didn't do any discounting. They don't believe in it. And one reason, I suppose, I was chatting to him this morning. He said that he feels that these customers will be worth a lot more in the long run, and that it is kind of saving a lot of the integrity of the brand really to some extent. So again, it'll be an interesting one to dive into and just kind of chat about in a little bit more detail.
100%. Before we do that, just to touch on a couple of StoreHero specific user insights as to what we've found across our user base. So we've been fortunate to, ultimately, for better or for worse, most e-commerce businesses serving direct to consumer as their kind of business model across multiple industries have this problem of getting a consolidated view of their sales and marketing data through the lens of profitability. And because that problem exists, it has given us an opportunity to see this run across multiple industries. So I think consistently what we've seen is a big contribution margin increase year on year. Now ultimately big is different for everyone, ranging from kind of 3% for some brands, further is over 200%. So just for context, for anyone who's not ultimately familiar with that contribution margin metric, what we're looking at there is our gross margin after we already factor in our marketing costs or advertising spend. So that's after, instead of using that net sales number, we're looking at, net of, or, after product, packing, shipping, transactions, discounts, returns, ad spend, and maybe any other marketing costs you want to attribute. It's a real aligned number to use as your kind of holy grail, because ultimately it's not masked by the fact that you might have really solid underlying unit economics, but your CPA and your cost to actually acquire those customers via ads is so high that you're not necessarily profitable on a per order basis. And so it's very much in line with that. We saw a massive, I think it's a number we're very proud of, 90% of StoreHero users saw a contribution margin increase for BFCM weekend year on year, which ultimately is somewhat self-selecting. A lot of the users that are ultimately signed up to StoreHero are making a decision to be more profit-oriented, but it's certainly a nice number to be looking at.
Definitely. I mean, even from my perspective, the last couple of years were spent working in Shopify, and we were only really seeing what I know now definitely is one side of the coin. obviously with Mama's Business at Home, I was very much looking at the Facebook ads and had a StoreHero type competitor myself on a Google Sheets doc for years that would take hours to fill in every week. But it's been really, really interesting to not just see the sales metrics, but now also to see a wide variety of businesses and actually see not just top line sales metrics, but after you take into account, as you kind of alluded to there, not just product cost, but also packing, shipping, transaction fees, and then all of the ad costs that go along with it, and see, okay, maybe the guys that have really high top line sales numbers might not be the guys that have the really high contribution margin or the profit numbers at the end of the day. There's so many variables and dynamics to play that every business is so different, that it's just really, really interesting for me to actually see the full picture for brands this year. And like everything you've kind of alluded to there as well, the brands that are coming to us that we are working with, again, have made that decision to be probably not moved away from looking purely at sales, but they've definitely made it, I suppose, a conscious decision to definitely look more so at profitability rather than top line sales.
Definitely. And even to touch on that as well, we saw a 28% aggregate increase in net sales across our brands. And now ultimately with that, that's funny enough, it actually lines up relatively well with the Shopify number and overall. Again, probably skewed a little bit by nature of the fact that we've some self-selecting going on. It's not a pure sample size of every type of store. It's going to be people who, again, are looking with to be a little bit more profit oriented. One last note, just in terms of those user insights, as we suspected and spoke about in the podcast last week, ultimately we did see that push where brands were more cognizant of getting started with the Black Friday sales, earlier than ever before, I suppose. What otherwise used to be in a 72-hour window in which it represented a small percentage portion of your year, and you could afford to be very aggressive with your discounting, it's suddenly a 1/12th chunk of the year if you're running that for the month of November. And again, what you're willing to forgo in 72 hours is often very different to what you'd be willing to forgo for 30 days.
Yeah, I mean, it's a terrifying time of the year. I mean, for a lot of anyone in this game, really, because the window to purchase, although it has kind of elongated a little bit, it's still so minimal. Like you put almost all of your eggs in one basket for almost 10 days of the year, and you kind of pray to God that it goes right. And thankfully, a lot of the brands we have been working with, it has gone right. But there is that, I suppose, week or two of anxiety leading up to it, just hoping everything that you've kind of planned materializes correctly. But thankfully, it has gone right for nearly everyone we're working with, which has been fantastic.
Definitely. Well, I suppose with that in mind, we can actually dive in and start to look at these numbers a little bit more specifically. So the first brand we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive on is a really interesting brand. They are a jewelry business based in the US, based on the West Coast. Ultimately, from their perspective, a couple of notes that may give a little bit of a background as to, ultimately what the business looks like this year as compared to kind of previous years. They had actually seen some dramatic growth in 2022 versus 21. They did so quite aggressively, and in doing so, even looking at the year overall, they found that while that overarching sales metric was up significantly versus 2021, they didn't have as much to show for it in a profitability perspective, or from a profitability perspective. So that's a big piece that we wanted to work with them on to understand, okay, ultimately, what is that true North Star? Ultimately, there is definitely a value in that overarching net sales, metric going up. It grows the audience, it grows the brand significantly. But again, at what cost? Defining that cost and making sure it sits in line with the profitability metric was a big portion. Ultimately, one other piece of context that's relevant there is they'd previously focused very heavily on discounting. Now, in jewelry, because their underlying unit economics were strong, ultimately it wasn't as much of a red flag as they may have anticipated. But the downside was their customers were trained to expect and wait for discounts. So therefore, they found they really had to kind of take them off of that drug whereby their sales were maybe choppier because ultimately people would be knowing that there's a very aggressive discount every couple of weeks, and therefore they maybe were making decisions for the right reasons. They're ultimately not going to drive repeat purchases for a product that's not strong, but they're missing an opportunity to kind of grow brand equity overall. So that's a big piece as well we wanted to kind of identify within the platform. And then from there as well, there was also very little to show from a net profit perspective at the end of the year through all that work. Now that was a combination of some of that over discounting or heavy discounting, but paired with high headcount, high agency bill, and high software bill. So ultimately, the headcount versus agency is typically a one another, but all these kind of values aggregated meant that there was a lot of wasted spend. Anything you'd add on that, Thomas?
If you want to just toggle on OPEX as a percentage of net sales there, I think it'd be an interesting one to kind of have a quick
Yeah.
look at there. But yeah, I mean, it was an interesting one. This brand, as you mentioned, were definitely a lot more discount orientated than other ones. There is that kind of short-term pain for a couple of months when you're trying to retrain the customer away from just solely relying on the discounting. But as we can see here, it's definitely paid off. It's even interesting, I think, just to note that, okay, like net sales have gone up by 4%. This doesn't, like, for a lot of brands, this be like, oh, well, that's nothing to majorly shout about. But when you actually get down to the nuts and bolts of it, really what the business is built to create is a profit. And there is a 4% uplift in net sales year on year. But if we look at the profit after marketing, we can see here it's gone up to 98K, so up by 14% year on year. And as you can see in the bottom left-hand corner there, it's actually a decrease of 9% in spend. So, okay, now we've increased sales by 4%. Profit after marketing is up by 14%. And the operating costs of the business there, as we can see, are down 79% year to date, month to date, year over year. So what really has happened here is, even though top line sales growth has only gone up by 4%, the profit after marketing is up by 14%, and the operating costs are down by 80%, basically. So all in all, that leads to a net profit increase of the business in I think 55%. Yeah, and there was a number of reasons, I suppose. Definitely probably been a little bit over aggressive with the discounting last year. Probably over aggressive on the marketing budget to some degree, because the marketing budget you should only be really increasing the marketing budget if the results are there. But it probably looks like in retrospect that there was spending to justify top line revenue metrics as opposed to justify kind of contribution margin metrics as well. That, on top of the efficiency now that they've kind of gained, I suppose, from reducing their headcount and some of their software expenses, has just meant that the business has really just done a 180 in terms of going from barely profitable to really turning a serious profit. And we can see that over the last couple of months.
Yeah, I think this is a great example because of the fact that net sales number actually hasn't moved very much. That every business isn't made equal, and every kind of fancy vanity metric that's screenshot of your Shopify dashboard with a really nice net sales or even a total sales number a lot of the time isn't actually reflective of not only the health of the business, but maybe even the sanity of the business owner as well. I think everyone that's a business owner, in whatever context or involved in e-commerce to whatever extent that's listening, can understand, there's a different daily stress level associated with these otherwise two businesses year on year, but ultimately obviously the same brand, same net sales, but a completely different outcome. So I think it really shows, okay, if it's a case where you're optimizing for that net sales number, you have to be very careful. For all those reasons we discussed, the same level of kind of perceived effort when it comes to the top line sales gives a completely different outcome. One piece that I thought was also interesting with this store as well, if we dive in and actually see net sales have grown 4%, and ultimately with ad spend down 9%, we actually saw new customer growth down, or new customers, the absolute number of new customers down 19% to 1186. Now, that even shows this concept, in reality, because in this particular situation, they've actually made up that difference by increasing their average order value by 15 and 14%. So they gave themselves more scope to actually not be too, have to kind of toe the line too much when it came to their cost per acquisition. They gave themselves a little bit more space by ultimately paying X dollars to get a kind of an order through the store, but did more to show for it. Their new customer AOV, for anyone just listening, was $69, 15% year on year.
Just talk through that one actually a little bit, because that probably is definitely leading into the contribution margin increase of quite a bit as well. Well, there was a couple of things that they worked out with their agency in terms of the structure, the offers that they were running.
Definitely, it's definitely worth mentioning. So again, everyone will perceive that overarching net sales, and it feels like a big mad push to get that overarching number up. But in reality, that's made up of a number of component parts. Your new customer revenue and existing customer revenue represented as sales here, but also in the context of AOV. So we said, okay, looking at your kind of store, looking at some of the Klaviyo metrics within StoreHero, your email is actually working well. You've great brand loyalty. With the nature of a category like jewelry is that there's plenty of opportunities to upsell. You're not tied into one particular SKU. With that in mind, we kind of encourage them to look, okay, how can Klaviyo do some more heavy lifting? How can we increase that AOV? So one thing I know their agency did, which was ultimately introduced free gifting. And with that, over a certain spend threshold, a user got a free product, which is a really important one. I know we touched on it last time, but as compared to discounting, where it brings down the average order value, gives you kind of a smaller potential window or a CPA that you can actually live with. Your free gift, you're obviously valuing it at the sale price, but the incurred product cost is a lot less. So you again could maybe give a $20 gift, which costs you $2 or $3. The customer is delighted, and then from there, most of the time it completely evens out because your CPA will reduce by $3 anyway. So really, really interesting concept. And again, it didn't mean that they had to grow new or repeat customers in order to kind of achieve that kind of overall growth.
Really, what we're saying there is, if you're a high margin business trying to offer a free gift with purchase to really incentivize a higher average order value, is definitely a surefire way to try and do it without any real monetary risk, I suppose, that like other than a straight 10% discount would actually do.
So yeah, really interesting exercise. I think it's something that again, we don't often get an opportunity to see under the hood, so much appreciated to that customer for anonymously, but nonetheless allowing us to kind of go into some detail there and give some context as to how others can maybe take some key lessons there. In summary, overarching net sales doesn't necessarily mean things are working under the hood, but if you get that number, front of mind and can make decisions with that in mind, the same overarching net sales can really have a completely different profitability impact. So to touch on the second store, we wanted to make a point of giving a completely different perspective here, a different experience of BFCM 2023, and ultimately making different decisions, I suppose, off the back of that different data. So this is an Australian women's apparel brand I'm going to pull up here. Before StoreHero, they were already a really fast-growing business. So probably got to go from 1 million in 2022 to about $5 million in 2023. Absolute, killers when it comes to ads. Really know their stuff, manage a lot in-house, and they know their stuff. With that in mind, I suppose they were already growing aggressively. We didn't kind of build this rocket ship; they were on that already. But they invited us along for the journey and wanted to kind of keep an eye on the profitability side as they went. So I suppose maybe Thomas, you can give some context here, as I pull it up.
Yeah, for sure. I actually spoke to this guy this morning. Really, really interesting brand. So, kind of a higher end Australian women's clothing brand. Didn't do any discounting over BFCM, which is a really, really interesting, I suppose, point to take. Just I suppose a bit of context, I suppose, in what we spoke on this morning. We feel that the business owner would have mentioned that he feels that maybe they didn't understand how aggressive their competitors were going to actually discount, and maybe it actually affected them a little bit worse than they might have initially anticipated. That being said, this is year-over-year growth here. It's phenomenal. So we can see here net sales up by 460%. Yeah, I suppose, just to kind of touch on why we started working with us as well. As you said, we cannot take responsibility for the growth of this brand, but it's been really, really interesting for us to watch it as a case study and see how they're using the platform and how they're actually using it to make the decisions to just, I suppose, enhance their growth even further than that. Down the bottom left-hand corner, we can see here that month to date, year over year, spend is astronomically up, nearly 700%. That's kind of fused with, I suppose, top line sales growth of 460% in the top left-hand corner. And we can see there that even though the spend has gone up dramatically, we can see the MER, so that's your marketing efficiency ratio. So for every dollar that this business has spent on marketing, it's generated 293 in returns. So the efficiency of the spend, so the spend has gone up by nearly 700%, but the efficiency of that spend has only dipped by 33%, which I think is remarkable and testament to the way that the ad accounts are structured. This all culminates in, I suppose, the fact that the contribution margin up there is up 230% basically year over year. So we're not looking at straight top line sales, although it's still very, very impressive. But I mean, 230% contribution margin growth year over year is it's astounding, really. So it's been really, really interesting to watch them grow the brand, and I'm really looking forward to work with them going into next year. A couple of interesting pieces here, I suppose, even in comparison to the last brand we kind of looked at there, where they probably had overhired. There might have been too much software in the business, too much agency bills, and so on and so forth. This brand has, as you can see here with the operational costs, they have scaled up with the business this year. I think they've had to move warehouse twice, and they brought on a couple of new really hard hitting agencies on board as well, who really seem to know their stuff and obviously are helping them really with this kind of top line growth and the trajectory that they're on in general. But just interesting to see that you can build a team, scale it up with the business, and do it responsibly, and also see that net profit growth that we can see here. Like, not only have we kind of gone for that, I wouldn't say it's growth at all costs, because we've definitely conserved a pretty impressive profit number here residually as well. But we have grown top line sales significantly, and we've also grown our bottom line sales significantly there. Nearly a 5x on top line growth and nearly 3x on bottom line growth there in terms of net profit as well, which is extremely impressive.
Yeah, definitely. I think, as you said, you explained it quite well there. It's not growth at all costs. There is a cost associated, and it's a case of kind of setting those guardrails. But it does show it's not all or nothing. It doesn't mean here that to shift to a profit-oriented mindset means you have to sacrifice growth of your business in order to do so. There's a happy medium here, and you can choose to be as aggressive as possible. But I suppose our broader point is that it's no solution to have your head in the sand. Now that might not be for any other reason than the genuine difficulty in getting a consolidated view of some of these metrics. I think it's the reason why we feel like people are taking our calls over the last couple of months, is that there's an actual problem they've identified that isn't easily solved without a lot of manual work on spreadsheets at the best of times, if you have a capacity to do that. So yeah, definitely two kind of important examples. You can see here as well that there was, to kind of look at the new versus repeat customer growth, they definitely did see a shift in both cases. But again, I think often a good one to reference, again, that net sales being made up of that, new versus repeat customer net sales. Treat them not as completely independently. Of course, there is a consistent overlap in your product offering and brand and everything like that. But, if one is really pushing, make sure the other one isn't letting you down, or, great work on one side in terms of new customer acquisition maybe isn't being matched by, maybe you're not using as much of your kind of repeat customer army that you've built, especially as the years go on. So I suppose from your perspective, Thomas, is there anything else that, with these kind of scenarios in mind, that you would recommend, that maybe it's not even these brands specifically, but maybe other stores keep in mind to kind of take those lessons into either the rest of 2023 and 24?
Yeah, I mean, even looking at this store specifically, I suppose one baseline, I suppose, that they've consistently used StoreHero for is monitoring that contribution margin piece. As they've dialed up ad spend, they've done it extremely aggressively this year, but it hasn't been without a keen eye in looking at that contribution margin piece literally daily. So they're getting their email every morning. They can see the increase in the ad spend. Has that correlated in more profit after marketing? Or actually, have we overshot the cannon a little bit? And okay, we've increased marketing spend, top line sales revenue's gone up, but actually our profit we've left at the end of the day has actually fallen. So they've kind of really used the platform, I suppose, to get that sense check on a daily basis. And it has probably allowed them to toe that line between top line sales growth and efficiency of marketing spend, and really efficiency of profitability at the end of the day as well. So they've done it really, really well, I think, and they've really started to build solid foundations for the year ahead. They're really planning big things for internationalization next year. They're literally only selling in the States at the moment, but I think there's plans to kind of hit Europe and the US a lot more. It seems like they've really got their fulfillment in order as well. So personally, I'm really looking forward to seeing what they do next year, and looking forward to kind of having a bird's eye view and helping them along the way as well. But I suppose they've been very, very proactive in terms of building for the scale as they've gone as well. Like every time I speak to them, there's more work going on to improve the site. They're trying to enhance different bits and pieces around the site. Very, very keen eye on ads themselves. Very involved in running their own ad accounts. Very involved in consistently tweaking little CRO optimizations, conversion rate optimizations, obviously on the website there, adding newer bits and pieces in terms of apps. I know they added video wise recently that has definitely given a good boost to conversion rates as well. So I mean, yeah, just being in the weeds, I suppose, really just getting your hands dirty and getting into the ad accounts, getting into your Shopify, consistently monitoring, tweaking the data makes all the difference.
Yeah, one piece to maybe finish up, to put a finer point on that. I think whatever the situation here, completely different businesses, but getting very clear on where you are and where you want to go is the first step in that process. Sounds very basic, but people will set these lofty overarching net sales or maybe profit goals, but without a tactical approach as to how to solve them or how to reach that number. If you can even do so anyway, maybe do the numbers even line up in order to facilitate it. Understanding, is it a net sales or a profit goal, a contribution margin goal, which we're kind of would really underline and put focus on, I suppose, and encourage other users to focus on. From there, that should really dictate your metric at each stage of your funnel. If you have a specific contribution margin goal to reach or a net sales goal to reach, that you can extrapolate that out and understand what does that mean in terms of volume of orders at a certain AOV based on a certain conversion rate through your website, at a certain cost of traffic from various channels, at a certain expectation of Klaviyo emails versus flows, SEO implication. It all could be tied back to that overarching goal. So as clear as you can be in defining those, it solves a lot of kind of internal misalignment, because finance want one thing, marketing wants another thing, leadership team wants something else. And again, you're spending time throughout the year, not only spending time consolidating data, but actually confused as to what the finish line or the goalpost is to actually reach to get there. So anything else from your side, Thomas?
Yeah, the one thing I'd say on that is it's easy to say. It's harder for a lot of people who aren't, as in, this is all we do all day. So it probably is easy for us to kind of whip this together pretty quickly. But if you're not, and most people wouldn't be because they're running a full business along with just looking at their data on a daily basis. So I get it.
Great point.
But it could be an exercise we actually do next week. We actually just go through a full profit first sheet and actually extrapolate out month by month how to actually do your forecast for next year, and not just top line sales, but actually saying actually putting in what's your profit goal on a monthly basis, and then actually the marketing that you'll need to get there would just be a byproduct. And I think that'd be actually a really interesting session to do a full session on how we'd actually do that.
Great idea. 100%. And that's the thing, especially coming into this time of the year. Obviously, people are still in sales mode and will be busy, I suppose, for the next couple of weeks before they get a chance to put the feed up. But going into the new year with a little bit of a clear view as to what success looks like will definitely help. So thanks for bearing with us, everyone who's listened. Hopefully this has been a beneficial component. I know there's plenty of stuff coming. We have some other users who are really eager to share, help give other brands and potential stores help along the journey by kind of diving into the weeds and kind of delving behind the scenes a little bit as well. So all to come. Any questions, just let us know. And hope to speak soon.
Thanks, guys.